Joining us now is our favorite celebrity historian. Please welcome Raffi Andonian. Good morning, Raffi.
Hey there, good morning.
How are you today?
I'm doing good, Ready in my, kind of Western wear with a little bit of a, fun tilt.
Okay, so I could try to guess our history lesson based on the costume, but I'm just going to leave it to you, our expert. What are we talking about today?
We're talking about Buffalo Bill and Buffalo Bill's Wild West shows. And, today is the anniversary that he presented or was actually performing for the Queen of England in 1887. And if you think about it, that really symbolizes the fact that Buffalo Bill and his Wild West show became an international sensation. And, when you're playing for the Queen, I'd say that's pretty cool. Now, it's not the first time he had been playing for someone international. It was the first time we went abroad, overseas.
Ooh.
But for example, when there was a Duke from Russia visiting the United States, he had taken him around in the Old West, trying to show him, what America is about. So it really kind of tells us sort of how successful that Buffalo Bill and his depictions were. Now, it didn't just go all around the world. It came right here in Fargo and other cities in North Dakota. Bismarck is one of them, Jamestown, Grand Forks. He came across the West and the East Coast, all over the place. And in Fargo, the local newspaper actually wrote that the show was as good as advertised. There's a lot of hype, and sometimes, shows don't live up to the hype. But Fargo, they said, yeah, this is actually pretty good. So it actually, it shows you what a great hit it was. And I'll tell you a couple things about it. What was in this thing that was such a hit? Well, for example, how about a relay with the Pony Express? I thought that was kind of cool.
Oh, wow.
Of course, depicted major events like take Custer's last stand at the Battle of Little Bighorn. Including actually Native American participants from the battle itself who were part of the performance. So Custer's widow actually endorsed this depiction, if you will. And the final one I'll point out that's really cool is they had someone stand with a cigar in their mouth, and a sharpshooter, her name was Annie Oakley, would shoot the cigar out of the mouth, believe it or not.
Oh my goodness, that's a step up from the apple on the head one.
That's right. That is a step up, I would say.
I love it. Okay, the only thing I knew about Buffalo Bill before coming into this interview is that he's the epitome of the Wild West. So how did he really get started and get that title?
Yeah, he is the epitome of the Wild West. And actually, he started, we think, in the Pony Express. Now, there's some people that dispute that, but likely he started in the Pony Express as a teenager. He certainly worked as a teenager because his father died young.
Okay.
So it's also an American story because he started from those humble origins in the West, on the frontier, was born in Iowa Territory, and comes up to major fame, right? Now, he also, for example, served in the Civil War as a soldier. He served during the Plains Wars as a soldier. And so he was beginning to get, if you will, build a career. And in that career, for example, you may not realize this, but he won a Medal of Honor.
Really?
Medal of Honor for distinguished military service, right? That's the highest medal that you can get in serving in the military during the Plains Wars. And so he became a legend, or kind of I should say the main figure, the main character of a dime novel written by one of his friends because of his conquests as a soldier, both in the Civil War and out west. And that novel became a hit in part because of what we would call today a book tour. And what I mean by that in that context at that time was his friend and himself and a couple others, including Wild Bill Hickok, by the way, not the same as
different Bill.
as Buffalo Bill. And Wild Bill Hickok, of course, was involved in a shootout in Dakota Territory in Deadwood. And there was a story in Deadwood that this play would depict. And so this is kind of how the connections happened. So they did know each other. But they did a staged play depicting the Wild West as a part of a novel. And then eventually what happened is Buffalo Bill himself split from the book tour, split from the stage, and said, I want to create more like an extravaganza. It was a 4th of July celebration about 10, 12 years later after the book. And he did a whole, more like, I would say, like a circus. Instead of being cramped into the stage and just being, limited to the stage limitations, he did all those additional activities that we talked about, not just depictions, but you go and interact, more like a fair, seeing these kinds of things. To give you an idea of how big the audience was, he was averaging about 20,000 or so per performance or per sort of his Wild West show per audience to get. And back then, the population of the United States in the census, I looked it up, was about 1/5 of the population today. So if we adjust for proportions, it's like he's getting 100,000 people, an entire huge stadium full of people today, if we were to translate to today's numbers. That's how big a hit he was for decades.
That's crazy. And he is still big today. So let's talk about his legacy and the impact he leaves right now in 2025.
Well, think about, you think about like Wild West films, right? Films came into the picture kind of toward the end of his life and then after he died. And I do think that, he impacted the movie and entertainment industry overall in a major, major way. But I would say that most of all, he influenced how we think of even the discussion over the Wild West. We think about, we have a certain imagination of the West. Part of it accurate, part of it inaccurate. It's kind of a pop culture depiction. And it's not anything, that's not necessarily knocking him, because that's true. Anytime we have pop culture depictions, there's going to be some accuracies and some inaccuracies. But you think about sort of this notion of wilderness versus civilization is something we think about. And that was something that appealed to audiences back then. And, you think about, for example, Mark Twain or General Sherman. They actually commented on the accuracy and details of his stuff, believe it or not.
Wow.
But there are also some inaccuracies, like, for example, portraying American Indians always as the aggressors, for example, would be an example of that. But this notion of where is the frontier of the United States, we still kind of deal with sometimes. We think about, for example, we always talk about, resources. Like in economics, I have an economics background too. You have something known as physical capital, human capital, and natural resources and technology. These four things contribute to productivity. And when we think about productivity, it's no surprise that the natural resources, i.e. this notion of the frontier, gave them stress when it was declared closed by the United States government in 1890. And this is something that the 1893 Chicago World's Fair actually was worried about. There's a famous person, Frederick Jackson Turner, who wrote a paper and presented there at the same place that Buffalo Bill is presenting his or doing his show, worrying about the frontier closing. Think about it. Later on in Buffalo Bill's life, you have people coming with automobiles to come see a show about people riding horses or the vanishing of the buffalo and what that makes the Wild West disappearing kind of feel like. And I do think there's some lamenting of that and some economic concern of that in terms of the expansion. And later on, you can argue part of American global expansion in economic markets is, in part, a search for additional resources to continue to feed the economy because we want to see economic growth. And so we don't do it the same way, of course, as in the past on the so-called frontier.
But all ties back to him.
Global expansion.
I love it. Well, I'm going to lasso you in here, Raffi, because we got to get out of here and check in with Sophia live from Newman Outdoor Field. But thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you.